This is the 411 on Leadership podcast brought to you by Dale Carnegie of Orange County, powered by Sitch Radio. Visit sitchradio.com for all your podcasting needs. My name is Steve Thomas. I am an executive consultant, VP, and facilitator with Dale Carnegie. And before we get going today, we want to recognize all of our women in leadership, women executives, all of our women that is doing it day after day. I've been very fortunate to grow up with three sisters. And so I just know of the importance of having their influence in my life, obviously also with my mom as well. And so women, we value and we treasure everything that you bring to the table each and every day. So for the next few shows, we are going to have the opportunity to highlight a number of awesome ladies who are doing big things in their respective workplaces. And so beginning with today, I'm so excited to have with us Dr. Anita Polite-Wilson. Dr. Anita is the founder and CEO of Dr. Anita Enterprises Incorporated. For 20 plus years, she's partnered with leaders and teams in the design, development, and delivery of diversity and inclusion and belonging content and related leadership skills training for organizations such as the CDF Labor Law, the Women's President Organization, Network of Executive Women, Sony Entertainment, and that's just a few. One thing I do really appreciate about Dr. Anita is her approach. And her approach is that she doesn't lead from a position of addressing race relations, as she's a diversity, inclusion, and belonging facilitator and coach, but instead she leads from a position of cultivating deep relationships that transcends race relations by valuing every voice. So welcome, Dr. Anita. So glad to have you on our podcast today.
Thank you, Steve. I'm thrilled to be here. And your energy is just like blowing me away right now. So.
I'm trying to keep a good distance from the mic, so I'm not blowing the whole studio out. But we're just super excited just to have you, because you are our first female here on our podcast. We just started a few weeks ago, so we're just really excited to have you,
Thank you.
Join our podcast. So considering your leadership journey, give us a little tour on your leadership journey, especially when it comes to the area of diversity, inclusion, and belonging.
Well, my leadership journey started in this particular field about 2 years ago. It was 3 years ago that I actually established my corporation. And up until that time, I'd spent the last 14 years working with the Aerospace Corporation and doing some leadership training for a program that was associated with UC San Diego. And the things that I was seeing most often was that people just kind of forgot the importance of being a person and who they were dealing with. And so throughout my leadership journey, it was never my goal to necessarily be an SVP. It wasn't. My goal was really to have influence with SVPs to help them remember and to realize the importance of valuing every voice, from the person at the front desk to the people that they work with and everyone in between.
So what would you say in your journey what would you consider your biggest success story?
I have several. And when I say I have several, it's because whenever I can help someone recognize their strengths, that's a success story. And then when I'm being told that my workshops are like therapy, I love that because I really do take, the principles that I'm teaching in the courseware and always dig a little deeper. That's really what people are needing. And then finally, just this morning, I was coaching a mentee. And when she told her peers that I was her coach, she said, "Oh, the whole room just went up. They're like, 'You're so lucky you get Dr. Anita.'" And it's nice to have that impact on emerging leaders as well as very senior level executives, just to know that the things that I share really do make an impact.
Yeah, great. And so when you think about where we are right now, just as a workplace and diversity and inclusion, that's all of a sudden I feel like it's become like a buzzword, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that's kind of like the latest rage. Before it was like employee engagement. Now it's like diversity, inclusion, and belonging. And so as we kind of look into this, I noticed something that you said on your website where you said diversity, inclusion, and belonging is a moral imperative for any business. Talk to us about that. What do you mean by that?
Well, we know that the D&I space has now grown from just diversity inclusion to diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging. And equity is a whole different side of things. I really focus on diversity, inclusion, and belonging. And for those who may or may not know, it's been said that diversity is like being invited to the dance, and
Yep.
inclusion is like being asked to dance. But belonging is feeling like it's okay whether you dance like Elaine, right, from
Yeah.
Seinfeld, or whether you dance like Carlton from Fresh Prince.
I'm
You
gonna
feel
leave you
welcome
for
to
both of those.
contribute. But the point is,
Yeah,
you feel welcome to
sure.
contribute, and you belong in this space. We need you here. And so in my work, I really focus on belonging. And I think that it's very important to begin with executives. So I have executive masterminds where we just spend some time talking about what diversity, inclusion, and belonging looks like for them as individuals that happen to hold the titles that they do and lead the organizations that we do. And one of my favorite activities is to get them to describe for me in their perspective, at their level, what diversity, inclusion, and most particularly belonging looks like, acts like, feels like, and sounds like.
Hmm.
I am of the frame that if you can't explain it, you can't attain it. And
Hmm.
belonging means something different to everyone. And so we need to understand what that looks like and then open up the opportunity for the people in the company to share what belonging looks like.
Yeah. It's interesting. I ran across a few statistics, over the weekend as it relates to, where we are as far as diversity in the workplace. And, census data mentioned by 2030, women will make up 51% of the global workforce. In addition to that, in 2030, 5 generations will be working together. That one, blew my mind actually.
Mhm.
And then also, minorities will comprise of 54% of the population. And yet, currently, right now, and this is according to Pat Waiters, who's the chief talent officer at ServiceNow, she's also a LinkedIn instructor. She had mentioned that only 3.2% of Fortune 500 companies show diverse numbers. And so, in your journey so far, especially as it relates to we're going to term it DIBS, but diversity, inclusion, and belonging.
Right.
But what would you say for you is the biggest challenge or threat right now?
Well, to tie off what you said about it being a moral imperative, if you consider the communities that businesses work and thrive in, they really need to be reaching back and making sure that their whole team, from executives all the way through the front ranks, look like the community. So that's what I meant when I talk about moral imperative when I'm thinking about your stats. Now, as far as the question you just asked me, I think what makes it important is the fact that we need to remember that we're representing everybody in the community, not
Mm.
just the business. And it's the business that provides a service. I think businesses, while businesses are in business to make money, and if they don't, no one
Yep.
has a job,
Yep.
they need to balance that with community service inside and outside. Too often, when businesses go out and they decide to expand globally, one of the first things they do is take their folks through cultural sensitivity training or whatever they want to call it.
Mm.
Well, if we feel it's that important to establish those relationships in the business world, shouldn't we do that with our folks that are servicing those new global clients? Yes, we need to
Mm.
understand cultures right where we are.
Mm. So as we move on, just to let you know, if you're watching live on our podcast, feel free to put in the comment section. We want to hear from you. If you have a question for Dr. Anita, who is with us, we love to have you put that in the comment section. Also, if you or put that question, in the comment section, but also your comments, we would like to hear from you. What are ways we are intentionally being more inclusive leaders at work, whether it's in person or remote? Go ahead and put those practices in the comment section. We love to be able to share those with others within our leadership community. So again, what are ways we are intentionally being more inclusive leaders at work, whether it's in person or remote? So Dr. Anita, our whole podcast is all about discussing common sense leadership practices that transform us into people, or transform us to leaders other people want to follow. And so we've been going over an article. This article we introduced a couple of weeks ago. This article was released on MLK Day. It was entitled Self-Leadership on MLK Day. And it listed 12 undeniable qualities of the best leaders. And so for our podcast, I wanted us to begin, and we've started the discussion already. I wanted us to focus on the qualities that, inclusion is leadership, but also leaders listen first. And so how instrumental is it for us to be inclusive leaders?
I think it's huge. When I saw that, the first thing that came to mind was Stephen Covey's "Seek first to understand, then to be understood."
Mm,
And in order to understand something, it requires you to listen. And oftentimes, when I work with leaders, I remind them that even though they're charged with the task of coming up with solutions and implementing programs, it's first important to listen to understand, then listen to solve. And too
mm,
often, we want to go straight to listening to solve. But leaders in particular, if they first understand that you need to listen first to understand, they might realize my only solution is, oh, I'm not the person you want. You need to go talk to Steve, or you need to
yep,
go find John.
yep,
And then you're done. So I
yeah.
think too often, when leaders fail to first listen to understand, then listen to solve, they actually create more problems for themselves than they otherwise would have.
Yeah, so I'm thinking also, in relation to that, just a couple of stats because people may look at diversity and inclusion, and I think you mentioned this before. It's almost like a one and done kind of a deal. Hey, you know
Mhm,
what? I'll do it as a check in the box, and
mhm.
I'll make sure everything's fine. But there are actually also some real tangible benefits from DIBS initiatives. One of those, I also got this from Pat Waiters, again, who's the chief talent officer. She'd mentioned a sense of belonging increases performance by 56%.
Absolutely. Mhm,
56%.
mhm.
So, in my mind, I'm thinking, well, man, what does it mean for us to, really have that a part of our culture? And what is that 56 uptick in performance? What does that mean for us?
Well, in my research, when I was going back for my doctorate, one of the things that I discovered was a technique, a methodology called the World Cafe. And you sit down at a table together and you look at a situation and you co create the future that you want to have. And so when I think about how much productivity can increase once we've got a sense of understanding of one another and we do it around a certain table, then we can get somewhere because then we don't see each other as you're of this persuasion, you're of that persuasion, or your gender identity is this. Not that that's not important, but that gets us away from understanding one another as human beings. And I've been thinking very deeply about this.
Hmm.
And one of the things that has occurred to me is that sometimes, in order for us to connect, we need to connect through our pain. Everyone can
Mm,
relate to what it means to feel excluded. If you think about a time where you were included on a team in school, how did that make you feel? Then, when you think about a time that you weren't excluded on a team, how
mm,
did that make you feel? No one wants to feel that way, and almost everyone can relate to that. So then, when we bring it into the workforce, you never want somebody to have that feeling of not being included because then you've got some psychological factors going on that never help anyone rise up and do their best.
mm. So then, Dr. Dia, what would you say is the biggest obstacle or threat for companies to embrace diversity, inclusion, and belonging initiatives?
I'll be honest with you, right now, I think based on a couple of projects that I'm working with, it is the unintended consequence of making sure that we have inclusion for everyone and excluding the voice of white males. And I've heard
Mm,
that white males wonder, well, do I even have a place in this? Am I being blamed for everything that's not right? No, that's absolutely not the case. We absolutely need the voice of white males. At the same time, when we're trying to be inclusive, sometimes we're inadvertently exclusive. And that's what I'm seeing today. And so when we talk about diversity, inclusion, and belonging, yes, we are righting some wrongs in some instances. I absolutely 100% believe that. But we've heard it said, two wrongs don't make a right.
mm,
In our pursuit of inclusion, we have to be very, very careful that we're not excluding anyone else because everyone's voice matters. We might learn from white males. I've never had to interact with anybody other than my space because that was my space.
mm.
Well, tell me about your space. What does that look like? And how can we help you feel included the way we're including everyone? Now, I can imagine that some people are not necessarily agreeing with what I'm saying. And peace, everybody's got their own opinion.
Sure.
But based on what I've been doing and what I know, we must include everyone's voice, everyone.
So let's talk tangibly, because one of the things that we want to do on this podcast is, not only talk about these issues, which it's, very, very important, especially our workplace today, but what would you say would be an initial first step, a practical step that leaders who are listening right now, who will be listening on the podcast, what is that one step that they can take to be more inclusive of their teams, whether it's in person, well, or more importantly, remote, because it seems to be it's a whole new ball game now with us, still in the throes of COVID. We're managing remote teams. So, what is the one tangible thing or takeaway that we can do as leaders in order for us to be more inclusive?
Steve, thank you for asking this question because it's huge and it's at the heart of the work that I do when I first work with executives. For anyone who wants to begin to try to kind of sort of get this right, you need to first situate yourself personally in the space of diversity, inclusion, and belonging. Because unless you've got those personal experiences that you can take with you into the work situation, you're not going to have the firsthand knowledge. You're not going to have the credibility. You're not going to have the authenticity that you need to lead this charge.
So, Doctor, what does that look like? If you mind drilling a little bit deeper.
That looks like this. It looks like if you don't have anyone in your personal circle that looks like anybody other than you, how can you possibly begin to relate to what the Black experience is in the workplace that says, I can't show up being authentically me because someone's going to have a problem with my hair. And oh, by the way, that's why the Crown Act was initiated, right? No one understands what it's like for me to, on the one hand, to act white, whatever that means, and on the other hand, deny being Black, whatever that means. Unless you understand that these are the situations that Black people deal with, switching, or Black and Indigenous people of color altogether, you're not going to be able to lead this charge in the workplace that says we value everybody if you don't value that in your own personal space. And I'll give you a really good example.
Sure.
There was one time where I was working with a company. I was an employee, and my rep, my sales rep, he and I had just finished a meeting. He was white, and we were walking across the parking lot, and I had to get something out of my car. And at the time, I was driving an S-Class Mercedes, the biggest one at that time. And after I'd gotten what I needed and locked up the car, and we continued on our way, he said to me, "Is your husband white?" And to make that statement says the only way you could possibly afford this is if your husband was white and had the type of job that would afford him to do that for you. Never mind the fact that I could have been a woman doing it on my own.
Sure.
The reason why this particular example is important is the last time I checked, that particular individual is actually the president and CEO of the company. So unless his perspective has been changed, unless his awareness has been raised, he may still be thinking only white guys can establish the relationships and have what it takes to bring in the dollars that I'm looking for. A person of color couldn't do it. If he's still operating under the same assumption that caused him to ask me if my husband were white just because I were driving a Mercedes. So that's why it's important to have that personal, firsthand knowledge of what it is to deal with someone outside of your own race. Black people have to deal with more than Black folks. Asian Americans have to deal with more than Asian Americans, and so on and so forth. But I think more in my work, I see where white people have the opportunity to really expand personal circles. And unless you've got that experience as an individual in your personal space, you cannot walk through the doors on Monday and say, okay, everybody, we're going to do a diversity, inclusion, and belonging initiative because it's important to the company, but it's not important enough to you as an individual to invest that personal time.
So really what you're saying, it really just begins with us.
It has to.
Who we are connected with. A couple of things and throughout last year where, tensions were heightened, whether it was Breonna Taylor, Jacob Blake, George Floyd, tensions were heightened. One of the things that always stood out to me, and this is from Dale Carnegie, the principle of trying honestly to see things from the other person's point of view. And really, we cannot really begin to have those connections or conversations if we are not adopting the mindset of seeing the position of what other people are going through. Whether they are a woman, whether they're Black, whether they're Asian, or whatever they're, have their special needs, whoever it is, it really begins with us really trying to honestly see things from their point of view and how they're perceiving things.
What you just said, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Steve, but I got to bring this point out. What you just said reminds me of a talk that I did earlier this year. And the example that I used really goes along to what you're saying. I was watching the first episode of This Is Us. It's not a show that I really watch, but the episode seemed very interesting. And in it, there's a character, a Black male who was adopted by a white family, the parents, the son and the daughter. And in this episode, it was supposed to be shortly after the George Floyd murder. And he was very upset, but he didn't say much. And his sister comes out and she's just crying. I'm so sorry. I feel so bad. And he said, why are you apologizing? What exactly are you feeling bad for? He said, I've been a part of this family, this white family, for over 30 years, and we've never had this kind of discussion. When these situations has happened in the past with Black males, none of you have ever asked me how I'm feeling. So what exactly are you apologizing for? Now, if we take that in a family, and they don't get it, what is that telling us about the rest of us? We need to extend ourselves to try to get it, to try and walk in someone else's shoes. Even if we only get a little bit of insight, it's better than nothing.
Yeah. And so I want to add on to that, and this is something you mentioned before as a good tool for all of us. You've mentioned, us utilizing listening. So one of the things in our courses at Dale Carnegie is we have what we call the 5 levels of listening. And so obviously you've got pretend, you could ignore. Those are self-explanatory. Selective is where we kind of pick up those things where we listen to respond as opposed to listen to understand. And then being really more at the proactive level, which is at the highest, where we're honestly trying to, again, not only see things from their point of view, but also understand how we can utilize that in building a collaborative group within our teams so that we can accomplish much. And I want to read this last stat to you. And this conversation is so good, but we're getting close to an end. I don't want to read this. This is from McKinsey research, which validates everything that you're saying as it relates to the importance of diversity, inclusion, and belonging in our workspaces. McKinsey research in 2015 said companies in the top quartile for racial and ethnic diversity are 30% more likely to have financial returns above their respective national industry mediums. Another point of research is companies in the top quartile for gender diversity are 15% more likely to have financial returns above their respective national industry mediums. So I think this whole conversation of diversity, inclusion, belonging is not going away. It shouldn't go away because there's not only a benefit to us as individuals, but to us as an organization and as teams moving forward. So as we bring this conversation to a close, Dr. Anita, again, we're so glad to have you here on this podcast. Where else can the listeners connect with you online?
You can find me at www.dranita.com. You have to spell it out, DOCTORANITA. I'm also on LinkedIn, Anita Polite-Wilson, PhD, and I would love to hear your comments and your feedback. If you're looking for a facilitator, if you're looking for a host, if you're looking for a panelist, call me. I'll be there.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Anita. We definitely appreciate having you join our podcast today. If you're interested or wanting to, we do have a seminar coming up, and I'm at a loss for words. I don't have my coffee. I will promise to have that before we start our next podcast. But we are having April 27th, we are facilitating a webinar at Dale Carnegie, which also highlights executives talking about how they're transforming their challenges into opportunities. This is from 9 a.m. to 10:30 a.m. on April the 27th. You can learn more at our website at dalecarnegie.com. Dr. Anita, thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to having or seeing all of you all next week. And just want to leave you with this quote. Remember, managers light a fire under people while leaders light a fire in people. Bye for now.
I love that. I never heard that quote before.